Day, October 21st, 2022. And here I am again with my good friend Ken and special guest star again, Shawn Carey. Hello, everybody. How are things?
Things are good. Last time I checked, I am well. Thank you for asking. Hope you are.
Fantastic. I don't know what it is about Fridays, but I have noticed I've been saying this a lot on Ziti TV. It's another lovely day here in the Western New York region. The fall colors have started to come out. I can't really share them with you, but maybe I'll get a second camera and point them at the leaves for anybody and everybody who might watch this now or in the future and wants to see deciduous trees turn colors, because I'm sure that's everybody.
And you
Um,
can see the diffused light from some yellowish green leaves on the back of my wall here.
Very nice. Very nice.
Normally the wall is a very gray color, so we
Well,
get that.
today, whoops, that is not what we want. We want this. Today, we are going to be talking about config types all over again. And as is customary, we will take a look to see if there are any release notes to be read. I do believe there are release notes to be read. Before we get into that, you guys want to get anything else on the table? Does that sound good? We want to crack right on?
Let's do it.
Let's do what Ken says. Let's do this. All right. So we do have release 26.10. And in this release, we've got, let's see, ZD component updates and bug fixes. All right. I do not like this release note format. I
Not working for
agents
you this time.
changed. Maybe it's just, maybe it's only because it's dependency updates. Maybe that's all it is. Oh, there's one bug right here. Okay. Edge router with embedded tunneler panics when intercepting services. Well, that's a bad thing. We can't have that. Yeah, I'm surprised that's all. Okay, well, that's quick. The quickest. Well, it's not the quickest release notes ever, but it's pretty darn close. Just a bunch of updates. This has a single fix for panic. I should have started off by just reading that, huh? That would have saved me and everybody about 30 seconds. So let's skip that. We'll minimize this. We'll go back. Now we'll start talking config types again. Before we talk config types, though, there are two ZD TV requests this week, which I always appreciate. So if you are new to ZD TV, oh my goodness, and you come out to our Discourse forum, we have a pinned ZD TV up here, ideas for ZD TV. I don't know if that shows up at the top for everybody. It might just be for me.
It does for me every time I
All
go
right.
to the forum.
I wasn't sure if it was just because I was logged in or whatever. But if you go into the ideas for ZD TV, you can see our good friend Markamind out here. Wanted one to talk about the different API connection methods, which I don't know if I totally understood his point and kind of clarified with the whole ZTNA, HA, AA thing. So that's one thing we'll talk about here in a second. And then Evan Curtis has asked for a simple conversation about how a zero trust overlay can prevent you from getting hacked, similarly to Uber. Estimating 3 minutes to cover the concept. Appreciate the estimate. Since I don't know how Uber was hacked, we'll have to go and read up on that a little bit. But let's start off with my classic slide. If you've ever watched me present the superpowers video, you'll recognize this particular slide. This is basically the three types of zero trust, which I think about. I do have to update some of my slides a little bit, and I'll talk about that in a second. But realistically, from the top to the bottom, you have the most or the least zero trusty solution to the most zero trusty solution. One of the things that's really important to think about when you look at these images is that you can mix and match each of these layers. So if you want to talk about zero trust networking access, realistically, it kind of only pertains to one side of the diagram, not the other side. Now, for simplicity's sake, and so that I don't have to show 9 different permutations, there's only 3 here. But you can mix and match this. You could have ZTNA on your left side, and you can have ZTAA on the right side, application access. So, just to and I don't know if this is in our superpowers videos, Ken. I don't think this one is. Maybe we should add this just in general. I think it'd probably be a good idea. But when I give this presentation, I will talk about zero trust network access. Generally speaking, lots of people consider the internet to be the scary place, and your local network, whichever side you're on, as the trusted network that never goes wrong. You don't have to worry about. Is totally able to be trusted. That's really not the case, though, right? I think everybody probably realizes that. So zero trust network access really is about having some sort of zero trust edge router or router device. And then that little router device basically accepts all your traffic and then sends it securely across the internet to some other zero trust edge router and then offloads onto your local network to do the trusted stuff. But you can see the trust zone on both sides is actually pretty substantial. It doesn't look that substantial based on the diagram because it's only one device host and one server. But if you had hundreds of servers on the data center side, and you had thousands of devices on your enterprise side, maybe you're like in a hotel or whatever. There's a fair bit of trust involved in that. So zero trust networking access is the first level of API connections or of zero trust connections. Anything before I move on to that, Ken or Shawn, that you feel interesting to add? Nailed it. All right. So the next one is zero trust host access. And here you can see immediately your trust zone has shrunk dramatically. So zero trust host access is a fantastic option from a zero trust perspective. Now, I also love to show the slide about how zero trust is a journey. You're never going to start with application access. You might not even be able to start with host access. So zero trust network access might be the best that you're going to get for now. But when you start, getting a bit more secure, you can go to host access, where you've deployed now a device, a piece of software on your device, which represents your zero trust connection. In the OpenZD world, this would be the tunneling applications. So whether they're the mobile apps, Android or iOS, or the desktop apps, ZD Desktop Edge for Windows, Mac, or Linux, that would be where you would onboard onto your zero trust overlay. You can see there's still trust involved, though. You still have to trust the whole device, and you have to trust the device's local network. Lots of people say, "Hey, that's perfectly acceptable. If somebody is on my local machine, I've got bigger problems," which I don't know if I particularly agree with, because it is very possible to compromise a single application which does not require administrative privileges. It's not like compromising the file system, for example. Um, so even though it's certainly better than zero trust networking access, I don't think it quite goes far enough, or at least not for me. But for lots of people, this is perfectly fine. And so that would be zero trust host access. And if you guys want to pop in, pop in. Otherwise, I'll just keep on rolling into the next one.
So I like the reference bringing it into our existing technology, and that this involves running a tunneler on either side. I think we omitted that for the previous slide.
Oh, and, well, I was talking about this will be running. Boop, 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 boop. This will be running our edge routers. So I did say edge router, but I didn't particularly get into it too deeply.
Okay,
Yeah.
because you could also do this with tunnelers, running them in like a as a gateway.
Oh, I got you. That's a fair point. Yeah. It does not have to be an edge router. You could choose to use a tunneling application. Yeah, that's right. Yep. Good point. All right. And then finally, this one is application access. So here, what we have, our trust zone is already diminished further. We've taken that zero trustiness and moved it to the left and moved it to the right. Now our application has zero trust principles baked into it. You can see there is still some trust involved. I don't know if you'll ever be able to avoid trusting the device. If somebody has root on the device, you are probably in a world of hurt. But one of the changes I mentioned earlier I wanted to add to my slides here, which I don't have, is adding a little tiny dongle off of this device, which would represent a hardware root of trust, thus allowing you to not worry about your private key that's that strong, the actual piece of your strong identity, which is really important to protect. You'd still have to trust the device. I don't know how you're going to get around that, but maybe I'll make the little gray box a little bit smaller. I don't quite know.
Right. With application access, you do still have to trust the operating system, but that's really beside the point. The change in the trust envelope is that you're no longer trusting other applications to be well behaved on the
That's
same
right.
device.
Yeah, so I like to call them side channel attacks. If you have two applications on your local machine, one application won't be able to just try other applications on that particular machine. So that's a little bit about zero trust networking access, host access, and application access. Remember, you can mix and match them. I should add another slide where it just demonstrates that you can mix and match them, right? And obviously, if you have the device on one side and the server on the other, you can put the server on this side and then the device on the other. They are symmetrical. So you can have zero trust host access over here, application access over here. You can mix and match to your heart's content. So that's a little bit about that. Now, the Uber hack. I did pull up I don't even know if it's any good, a blog post, and I don't know how did the breach happen? Well, thank you, blog post. I don't know. We'll give avast.com a shout out for telling me how this breach happened. Explaining this Twitter thread, they include consoles controlling workspace along with other critical system. One security alert reacted to the Twitter breach. Hacker had almost total administrative control over the company's computer systems, including software, source code, and internal messaging. Well, that seems what they got access to. How did they do it? The hacker? Subsequently spoke. Deep doop. They set up a man-in-the-middle MFA portal and tricked this user into revealing their authentication credentials. Well, all right. This will take no time because one of the newest slides I have added to my deck, that is one of my more favorite superpowers of OpenZiti, is not that. Oh my goodness. I'm going to have to unshare. All right. All right. PowerPoint. PowerPoint doesn't want to behave. We'll make PowerPoint behave. And I'll do this. I'll do this. This is one of my more favorite slides now, and one of my more favorite superpowers of OpenZiti. And I've titled this slide Implicit MFA. So when I was at the Rochester Security Summit, shout out, last week, um, there was a fellow there from the FBI, and he had a great keynote presentation. And he talked about how something like the FBI estimates, I think 60 to 70% of all attacks would have failed if MFA were simply enabled. So I put the slide in after that on that day because Ziti and a strong identity is an implicit MFA. If we go back to the blog post, you can see they set up a man in the middle MFA. So it sounds like Uber had MFA enabled, but they didn't have this strong identity. And so all the attacker needed was the digits for the MFA code in order to actually gain access. So you get somebody, you social engineer, you get their password. And then with 2FA enable, now you have to go get their digits. So you somehow have to social engineer their digits or stick a man in the middle, get their digits. So if you do that, even if you did that, if you had a zero trust overlay like OpenZiti running, you would have that implicit MFA of the strong identity. Even if you get my password to our HR system, you have to have a strong identity that lets you onto the network and authorizes you to access the HR system. You can't just get any identity. It has to be the right kind of identity. So even if you, and then with OpenZiti, and right now I think it's the Mac and Windows clients like this one they are currently, and we're working on Linux, MFA enabled. So you can't, at least through a UI, you probably could do it through command lines, but you can have an explicit MFA tied into Ziti as well. So you can have your implicit MFA of the strong identity and the explicit two-factor authenticator token experience that you're used to as well. So technically, you could have MFA just by using OpenZD. So anything you want to toss onto that little tirade, fellas? Is that good too? Am I nailing it?
What I'm hearing is that the implicit MFA is the multiple trust factors are the cryptographic identity that gets you network access in addition to whatever application level credential was already in place.
Yeah. So generally, the first factor is your username and your password. So right now, ZD is your secure connection from point A to point B. Right. If Clint wants to access the HR system, Clint would access the HR system via ZD, and I have to provide my username and my password to HR system. Again, I'm just making this up. So if somebody were to steal my username and my password, if it was a cloud-based service, then they could just log in from anywhere. If there was a zero trust overlay involved, then you would need a strong identity even to access the service. So even if you had my
Right,
username and my password, you wouldn't be able to supply it because you can't actually attach there. But
right.
but ZD also offers that third level of MFA-ness of an active two-fa token time-based one-time password thing. So you can put it into your mobile phone like this and actually get 6 digits, and you can't even get onto the network. You can't even get onto the OpenZD overlay network without entering your MFA explicitly, not implicitly. So you would have the TUFA token, the implicit MFA of the strong identity, and then the username and the password that you have to type in to even get into the HR system. That would be the 3 factors that I have in my head.
Yeah, I understand what you're going for there. 3 trust factors is stronger.
It's better than 2, but it's better than 1. All right. So now we can go over to the next topic of the ZD TV week that I wanted to cover. And this one I think is pretty interesting. So we've talked about this way in the past. I think way back in May. I got to find Discourse now, not Uber. Let's go back to Discourse. Discourse. And we'll find, yeah, I think it's this one. So out here, we've got this Discourse user, Daniel EB, and we've been going back and forth with this person since like May, maybe March. It's been a long time. They're doing something interesting and novel. They have a solution which they can deploy to sites. And when it's deployed to that site, it is always the same IP address. You know what? Maybe let me end big in this. It's always the same IP address. So they'll have some service on 192.168.1.2.1.3.1.4. And what they want to be able to do is they want to be able to basically use the zero trust overlay as a nexus of the same IP addresses, which is something we do not particularly support, right? It's a interesting use case. It's one that we kind of have even in NetFoundry. Ken and I have discussed this before. When we deploy our artifacts, equipment, routers. No, there's a better word for it. What are the things that we deploy? Routers.
Compute capacity.
Yeah, routers? What do we call those things? Whatever. Compute capacity. Sure. Whenever we spin up a new machine for usually edge routers in our NetFoundry console, the OpenZD cloud type of thing that NetFoundry supplies. When you do that in every single availability region, you have the opportunity to overlap the same IP space. So like North America East 1 has a 10.10.10.1 and North America West 1 has a 10.10.10.1 piece of equipment deployed, which is exactly the same situation that we're talking about here. Maybe a little bit different based on how many administrators, how many nodes, all that sort of stuff. But it's the same basic idea. So they want to be able to have admin PC1 be able to access site 1 or site 2 relatively easily. And they described, how they do this in the past is they have some sort of site-to-site VPN, and they can configure the active VPN connection through TeamViewer. I guess I'm not familiar with this, but it
So
looks like
that uses the
TeamViewer.
same IP to send the traffic somewhere else if they switch their VPN.
Right. So they change their VPN like this, and then they add a static route that lets them get to where they're trying to get to, and that's how they are able to maintain the site stuff. So we've been trying to think up with an idea, and then at one point they said, we have got like 10 administrators and thousands of sites, and we want to be able to do this. So I had this idea. I never really got around to testing it out to see if we could kind of come close, which is what I've documented here out in the OpenZT Discourse site. But I'm going to show you how it works right now locally. Actually, show it working. So I got 5 windows. Might be a little bit busy, but you can see one of these windows is 37.98. One of them is 35.217, and one is 47.200. Those are my 3 machines out in Amazon Landia. And so this was my where did I go? Come on, where did I go? This was my diagram that I made back in the day, kind of identifying the same sort of thing that Daniel LB has out there. And so the idea that I had is to sort of do the same sort of thing. Now, I don't have why my goodness, PowerPoint is just really not cooperating with me today. Thank you. I don't have a bunch of different IoT devices to connect to, but I do have a web server that's out there, and I did create 3 different ZD tunnelers to emulate Site 1, Site 2, and Site 3. And then I have 1 administrator. I don't need 3 of them because it's just me. But I've set all this up ahead of time. So this is the diagram that we're looking to complete. So if you just in fact, maybe I should have removed, oops, not that. Maybe I should have removed these 2 things just to simplify it. So Clint is admin 1, and he's going to try to access the HTTP server, which is on a given known IP address of 172.31.50.50 via these 3 sites, emulating the same idea that Daniel B is trying to do. So up here, you can see if I issue this curl statement to that IP address, it's going to go nowhere. And the reason it's going to go nowhere is because I don't have any of these tunnelers running. So I'll turn on my tunnelers on site 1, on site 2, and on site 3. And then I have a cute little change site script that basically does exactly what I put into the discourse, that just updates the admin1 config, which is me, and the dial identities. But it uses this fancy thing called dial options. And this dovetails, as Shawn told me earlier today, this dovetails nicely into the config types. So I have used a addressable terminator here, which is basically a way of allowing a application, an identity, to say, I'd like to bind on this service name, and I'm going to bind as myself, so that you can reference me as the terminator. And so what I can do is I can inform my intercepting client, which is my Windows desktop edge, my desktop edge for Windows. Where'd it go? Come on. It's right here. You can see I have an AWS Clint. I have 1 single service. This 1 single service is for, and it's so hard to read. I can't make that bigger. It's for one whole IP address space of 172.31.50.0/24. So I decided to make a CIDR intercept because I'm going to intercept that .50.50 IP address. So I've made an intercept config, which is what I'm doing up here, a intercept v1 config type, and I've used this dial options to specify that I'd like to dial the identity that I supply. So if I change my site to site 1, like if I log in first, and then change my site to site 1 like this, now if I make this bigger, I should be able to issue that curl statement, and we should see the service arrive. You can see all 3. Oh, go ahead, Shawn. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be a good time to point out the listen options side of this, the host config,
Okay. Let's do that. Let
just to
me.
see how they connect.
Yeah,
And I
sure.
like to start out whenever I talk about addressable terminators, I guess to put it in layman's terms, addressable terminators let ZD clients dial a specific endpoint when multiple endpoints are hosting a service.
Ooh, boy, that's so clean, clear. I love it.
So
I am
that's just
going
in
to.
general, and tunnelers can access this capability through these config type variables and the configuration options that we're talking about. But that's a general ZD feature to be able to pinpoint which endpoint do you want to connect to.
Love it. I'm actually trying to make the JSON more legible. So, in case you didn't notice, I use curl and I'm using curl here. And because I use curl, I just slapped it all into one line. But that's what the this is what the intercept v1 config looks like. I'm going to get the host v1. Or was it a host v1? No, it's the host. Let me get the intercept v1 too, just so that we can look at them in a relatively reasonable fashion where it's all formatted and all that sort of stuff. Oh, nice. You're going to complain. Okay. That's how it's going to be.
Give it a quick trip through JQ.
I got something wrong in there. I don't know what it is. I've got, it seems like I've got everything. JQ would also complain. I don't know why that it's like it's failing for some unknown reason. All right. Well, let's make a new text file. We'll do it over here and see what happens over here. Okay, well, this one at least told me an error. Bear with me.
The dial options is odd.
Oh, yes, you're right. That is exactly what it is. That is incorrect, and it's incorrect as well.
It's missing the identity.
Is that all it is? It's just
I
identity
think it's
interface?
missing the key.
Yeah. Yep, identity name. Do you remember exactly
It's just identity.
identity? Thank you. I have a bad copy paste then. Eagle eyes, Shawn strikes again. All right. So here is the intercept. As Shawn was saying, I was missing the identity key in my dial options. And site 1 is the one which I have used to indicate where I want my particular tunneler to send whatever I have just intercepted. And then once it gets over to the other side, I have set forward protocol to true. So whatever I intercept, it'll send along the way. And when you specify forward protocol, you have to specify the corresponding allowed. So I had to say allow UDP and TCP. I'm forwarding the address as well. And so then I have to say the allowed addresses, and I give it my CIDR range. I can make that CIDR range however big I want, but obviously matching seems reasonable. And then same for the forward to port, but this time I forwarded all the ports. So any port on anything in here, this thing will be able to forward over. And then this is the real key. On the tunneler, I can set bind using edge identity to true. So then when those devices, when those tunnelers come online, they're going to inform the overlay that they can be directly addressable. That's why when they all came online, they all received a service event that says they now have access to a service named remote access, remote access, remote access. Anything else you feel is important in
Yeah,
there, Shawn?
I guess so one thing is the bind using edge identity. Just to make that very clear. So that's gonna, when the hosting tunneler uses an identity to connect to the ZD network, and that identity has a name. And so this bind using edge identity Boolean says to use my edge identity as my listen identity. You could also, alternatively, you could specify an identity field here in listen options, just as we do in the dial options. And this could be anything you want. It could be, hard coded text, which wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because you probably want multiple identities to use this. And you wouldn't want them to all use the same identity. If you're using a tunneler, which we are because we're using a host v1 config, you can use tunneler underscore ID dot name. You can use that variable, which is equivalent. Now, this doesn't seem like a big win over using bind using edge identity, but we do have plans to expand the vocabulary of these variables. So we're just looking towards the future a little bit here.
Yeah. Are there any other, and I know documenting this is still on our to-do list, but are there any other fields on tunneler underscore ID? Like IP address,
Variables?
maybe? Okay.
No. So not on the listen options, because listen options, remember, the listen options is for hosting tunneler. The
Gotcha.
dial options, we do support some additional variables there. We could support you could specify $DST underscore IP, $DST.
Where do I hang on? Where do I specify that in the identity?
Yep, right here. Yep, $DST underscore IP, and then colon $DST port. You could do that. Those
And
variables.
before we go too far, so this is telling me to bind that whatever. So, if I understand this correctly, uh, the tunneler on like my computer right here would intercept 172 dot whatever, and that's the IP address that it's intercepting, and it's sending it to the destination IP. Where does that destination IP? Is that what I've intercepted? Is that what
Yes,
destination? Okay.
yes.
So
So
in that case, the
the
source would be like my 100.64 IP, and the destination is the 172 dot whatever.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. And so to use my example over here, if I was going to curl to 172.31.50.50 on port 80, if I used destination IP colon port like this, some identity somewhere would have had to have not bind using an edge identity, but could have done something like identity
Unless the name
colon.
of the identity was an IP address.
Yes, that's
But
exactly
well,
how we.
it would have to have the port in there too, though,
You don't have to. Well, because
based on
we
what we
put
did
port
here.
there. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we put it
right,
there. I just
right.
mentioned port as an example. I don't know when that would be useful. IP certainly is useful, and
Sure.
this is how we did direct addressing when we tunnel VoIP. We did exactly this. Every identity is named after an IP address, and this is how one phone is able to call another phone directly.
So is that like DHZP?
DHCP.
Yeah, every identity gets an IP address or is named an IP address, as opposed to every network card getting an IP address.
Right.
It's kind of like reversed.
Oh, I see. I got you. Yeah.
Yeah. So the name of the identity would be 172.168. Whatever,
Right.
or
Which is cumbersome, and that's where, if we look at in the future supporting variables, like where one of the idea that we have is to be able to use a variable here that lets you access the app data on an identity, and that might be getting deep for what our audience here. But basically, when you create an identity, you can put tags on it, and the idea here would be that you could reference those tags in variables, so you
and
could have more flexibility.
we do have some chat questions. Dariush is asking, can you use app data? Can you use app data on the listen side?
So app data is kind of overloaded. App data for an identity is just whatever data the OpenZT user wants to associate with an identity. You can just stuff it in there. And there's
And so
also app
so
data.
app data is that something I can edit in Zach? Is that exposed in Zach? And is it
I'm
tied to an identity or tied to a service?
It's tied to an identity,
Okay. So
and then
how would I add app data right now? Do I use ZDCLI then? Like if I
that's
go
how I
through.
would do it. Yeah.
All right, so let me just fire up a new one here because I don't think I've ever really toyed around with this myself too much yet. So I can do a ZD edge identity.
Yeah, create identity.
Device. And so
Yeah.
app data is in there. I see. And so I can just specify some random blob of string,
Right.
whatever, and then it's just special to me. Like I can choose what to do with it.
Yes.
Got it. Cool.
And so
Sorry to
one idea we have is to be able to reference that app data in these variables. Now there's another meaning of app data, and I'm not sure if Dariush was talking about that. Yes, thank you, Dariush. That's exactly the plan, is to implement that. And app data also is used
that'd
to
be so neat.
transmit data from an intercepting tunneler to a host tunneler.
And so if we had this, then I think where Dariush is going, I could have my app data with the IP address inside of it, and then you could name the thing whatever you wanted to name it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. All right,
Yeah.
we do have another question from chat. Love it. Could the dial options identity be a list instead of a single field? So you could, for example, dial the same terminator by either dialing a tag containing intercepted IP or tag or host name, or some other way to get to terminator more than one piece of information. Not sure
I'm
I'm not
I
quite
feel
I'm
like
sure.
there's a rift here. So the dial options are interpreted on a per connection basis. So whenever the tunneler, the intercepting tunneler, gets a connection, that's when the dial options are consulted. So for a single connection, the intercepting tunneler is going to take what it knows, which is really just what IP import did I intercept, and try and come up with resolve and identity to put in that dial options field. So having multiple values to resolve for the dial options, I'm not sure. I'm probably misunderstanding the
No,
question.
I think Dariush and you have answered it too. I'm rereading the original question, which is so for example, dial the same terminator by either a tag containing the intercepted IP or a tag containing the host name, which I think is exactly what Dariush was
Yes.
hitting at before with app data. It's a not yet, but
Well,
someday.
so another variable that we support today in the dial options.identity is $DST underscore host name.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's nice too, because then if you have a wildcard DNS implemented, very neat.
Yeah.
So I did a video a while back illustrating wildcard DNS, and I don't have the demo set up. I wish I did because I'd demonstrate it. But my old Amazon machine got toasted yesterday from me and Ken and Andrew doing some work. That machine that ran out of space, Ken, I
Yeah.
can't SSH to it anymore, so it's
Oh,
gone. Yeah. Oh well. But let's see, where was I going with this? Destination host name could be used with wildcards, which is very neat. That would be very cool.
I think we need one more, a couple of variations on this. We need probably want to repurpose $DST hostname to be the short hostname and have a $DST FQDN for the full hostname, and also have a
what are you
$DST
thinking there?
domain. So I'm thinking about the Daniel B use case.
Okay.
Doesn't quite get us there, but if we had a way for the intercepting tunneler to pick out the domain, the site that was being connected to. Now I know he can't use host names, so that
Yeah.
kind of rules it out. But for a general solution that we would all be able to support, if the dial options could pick out just the domain that was being connected to and use that as the identity, then every hosting tunneler would have a different domain. Like I'm site 2, I'm site 3, and
So you would go to like 192.168.1.1.domain 1 or site
well,
1.
yeah, yes, exactly. So we
Yeah.
could have host names that are IP addresses and domains that are sites.
Yeah. So it would look like this dot site 1, which is a valid domain. We would pull out.
No, no. So I was thinking that your identity would be site 1 for your hosting tunneler.
Mm-hmm.
Just site 1, not with the
This is
not
this is the this is the hosting side. I see. I gotcha.
yeah.
So we would just leave this as is because that's exactly what it does right now.
Uh,
Gotcha.
sure, yeah, you
I'll
could
put
do
it back.
that,
I'll
but
put it back for
just to make it
completeness.
clear, yeah,
Yeah,
just
I'll
to
put it
make
back
it
for completeness. So
exactly.
it would look like this. Yep.
Yep. And so your intercept, this
In
is
the dot.
yeah. So we need to exactly. So if we could have a $DST. I'm losing there we go. No, so I would still
Yep.
have your dial options. I would be the $DST domain without the IP address. Yeah. And then you would do for address, your intercept addresses would be 192.168.1/24, and you would do forward addresses. So the trick here is still what we don't have for Daniel B is how do you select the domain? How do you tell the tunneler what domain? And that would require us to intercept host names,
Gotcha.
which Daniel B can't do.
Right,
So,
right, right. No, but we're talking future stuff there, so that's
right.
cool. All right.
So we're getting, I don't, yeah, hopefully we're not getting too far in the weeds here going into
no, I
some of
think
these.
this is. I mean, we're on configs version 2 here, right? So like this is we're gonna go in the weeds. Dariush brings up a nice point, which the edge router does have that functionality. So that is one potential. Remember, we talked about ZTNA before. It is one potential reason to choose an edge router over the ZT Edge tunnel at this time, if that functionality is important. All right, let's see it work. I think everybody can just already imagine where this is going to go. But now my curl to 172.31.50.50 should go through here. You can see incoming connection. This is site 1. And I get my little Docker whale because that's what's running out there at that particular location. Let's go ahead and change it to site 2, and we'll see what happens. You can see it has received the change notification, so that worked well. I'm going to hit a couple enters just to make sure I see that's what I wanted to see. And then I'm going to make this curl. You'll see the incoming connection has happened down here. That's what we want to see. And go ahead and make site 3. It does take like 15 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds for the poll to trigger. It all depends on how lucky or unlucky you are. Like you can see the bottom one already received it, and now these are receiving their change event. Now, if I do this, you can see it comes through site 3. So relatively easily, straightforward, we were able to have one identity change the dialing identity, that addressable terminator we were talking about in quite detail. So this would be a particular option for Daniel B. It's nice because you would only have to have one service and one configuration for every administrator, as opposed to the first time around. The first idea I had was to make 1,000 identities for 1,000 sites and then just deliver the 1,000 identities to the 1,000 identifier admins, and then they could just use which identity they wanted to enable. But that's kind of unwieldy. This seems way easier to me. Let's see. We have another question. Does something, where did it go? Does something I suggested in the chat with Daniel B make sense on the dial side? I have to be truthful. I don't know which one you're referring to on that one. Let's go back to Discourse. I did see that Dariush added a couple of things here. I don't know if are these what you're referring to, Dariush, or is it the thing before? Because the thing before was this. I don't know which one of these two things we're talking about. Well, while we wait for the chat to filter over to us, what else is interesting in the config world, Shawn, that you want to get on the table, or do you think we covered? I think we covered a lot of ground with this one example.
I do, yeah, and I guess just taking a step up. Ideally, this whole concept that you just demonstrated of switching, updating a config type with a different identity. That's not how we like to do things. We're trying to help a user in a very specific situation where we
Yeah.
don't have flexibility on the client to intercept different addresses because the client software only it can't be configured. It always we have to always intercept the same address range there. And on the
So
hosting on the other side, every site has exactly the same address range too. So we can't do any NAT. We can't intercept host names. So any options that we might have for giving us some ability to address any site at any time is really taken away from us. We have to do this site switching technique to kind of mimic changing a VPN connection and updating a route.
yeah, it is a very unique situation, and specifically for a user who's kind of in a bind and doesn't have a lot of the capabilities of changing the far end. Was there is there like I got the sense that there's a worry that you have, and you brought that up for a reason. What's the worry?
Well, I guess the worry is that, people watching this and learning about config types and seeing these features that we can do, we're kind of I think we're doing two things in this episode today. We're showing you some cool features about the address types and some of the flexibility that we have with addressable terminators. And we're also showing you how to use those features to solve a very specific use case that is less than ideal. So
Sure,
I just don't
sure.
want the two things to be conflated. And
So now, yeah, I gotcha. So now to tie it back to that, Dariush, he brings up here, if you were able to use app data on the key name in order to set the dial options, that would be pretty. That would be able to much more flexibly address Daniel B's problem, right? Because then we'd only have one service that would need to be created. You wouldn't have to keep updating the service, but you would have to update your identity's app data each time. So you'd still have an update, right?
right, because
Yeah.
it's the intercepting tunneler's identity that we would be retrieving the app data from.
Yeah. But
Is the
I would still have to update my own app data in order to set that.
and is that app data the purview of the network administrator who has the permission to make changes in the management API, or is it the purview of the identity itself?
Yeah. That would be a nice, I actually don't know that answer. I don't know if you do, Sean. Because that would
Uh,
be right now, in order to do what I'm proposing, everybody will have to have administrator access to the overlay network, which
yeah,
obviously is less than ideal. If it were the purview of the identity itself, and it could set its own app data in this way, which I think makes a lot of sense,
Like
then
self-service metadata?
yeah, then it's constrained to me. I'm just updating my metadata. That seems
right.
like a good idea.
So that would definitely be nicer because then you'd only
Yeah.
have a single service and configuration,
Yeah,
and
and
you'd
possibly even enable the UI to do this sort of stuff, right? Like right in the
right.
UI, I could change my app data and presto changeo. Like I don't have to do the ZD CLI command stuff. That'd be
Right.
cool.
But I think from an accessibility standpoint, you need the same permissions today to update a service as
Yeah,
you would to update even
today.
your own identity. Yeah.
Yeah, today. But that's a cool. I like that idea. I think that would be. I think that'd be pretty neat.
That was kind of one of the ideas that I mentioned in the discourse was and it's something that we wouldn't want to support. But if we had a variable in our intercept config to like reference the contents of a file, so you could give it a path and say, I'm going to put the site that I want to connect to in this file, then I can use this variable in my config and it'll whatever that file has in it. There's a lot of
It does get a
wrinkles in
little
that.
scarier. That gets a little
It's scary.
scarier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was just
Cool.
trying to understand because at that point it hadn't sunk in, or it was just starting to sink into me that we're tied to our intercept IP address and our destination address on the egress side. We don't have any flexibility there. So
Right. Right. Well, I
Rewinding a
think
little bit, I was
yeah.
wondering what happens since the value of identity is arbitrary on both dial and bind side. I'm wondering what happens, well, in two different scenarios. A, there's no match for the value of identity on the dial side, or B, if there are multiple matches.
With multiple
Those are great
matches,
questions.
it'll round robin. So you'll
Really
go
round
from one.
robin? Because I mean, I wouldn't have guessed a round
I,
robin. Like who's controlling the
I
round
believe you
robin
can
then?
influence that. Like
I think that gets into a whole nother area
it
of
does. Yeah.
priorities. Yeah. So there's tooling. We have capabilities there to be specific and have rules about which of multiple ones would go to.
Yeah, and you can find that there is an article in the
And we had an
docs.
episode with Paul where we dove into load balancing a bit, and I did get some of those questions. So maybe the answer is that that complicated answer that Paul gave about how load balancing works. That's the answer if there are multiple matches, and if there are no matches, then I guess you're going to get no terminators or something.
Yeah, no
Is that right?
matches is a bummer because there's no great way for you to know there's nothing listening on the other side. You send your information into the void and it just doesn't come back. You know, so as a
Now,
user, yeah, go ahead, Shawn.
I thought as a user, as the in this case the tunneler, the dial fails, but the error message is specific, and I thought it said I thought you got an error that indicated.
I'm talking about the user, Shawn, not the developer. So like my
Okay,
mother would never read the log file to see that the dial failed. But you
you're
can
talking about
definitely
the tunneler user,
yeah, yeah. The normal quote unquote person who's
right?
trying to just use the connection that's been established. Like when you're doing development, it's obvious, right? You clearly see no terminators exist, and you have to know what that means. But that's a one-time learning lesson. But I'm talking
So
about the people like my mother who would never look at
yeah,
Okay.
logs.
I think the problem that you mentioned there is actually bigger than dial identities or addressable
Oh yeah,
terminators,
100%.
and that is yeah. So like if you connect to an address that we're not intercepting, it's just
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
the one difference though is like let me illustrate it. I'll turn this back off. I'll turn this back off. I'll turn this back off, and then up here I will do that curl again. And curl will just happily sit there forever, right?
Until curl times out because there's no server. There's no
Right,
response at all.
and I can tell curl after 5 seconds that curl can bugger off with a m minus M5. But like if I were to take this because it's an IP address, it gets a little, wonky. If I were to take that and go here, this is just gonna happily spin forever and ever and ever because that may or may not work, and the same would be true if I went to a DNS name associated to this. It's gonna resolve to that IP address, and it's gonna just spin looking like it's trying to connect, as opposed to if I go to, Bazinga dot, something dot com, right? Like, that's gonna hit instantly and say, "It doesn't exist." So there is a little disconnect there that maybe there's some, experience that we could try to make better somehow to more, you know, react in this way when that terminator doesn't exist. We just say poof, doesn't exist, done.
Pull it
Or
out of the DNS server. If
or something. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Anyway.
mean, because that's what's happening here is the DNS resolution fails, and that's pretty quick that
It,
happens quickly.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. But we don't have that right now. Like if I had an intercept, it would just spin forever, and I would not really know what's going on until I look at the logs. But yeah. All right. Well, anything else? We're at 54 minutes. I think this has been an excellent ZDTV. I've enjoyed this ZDTV. I hope you guys have enjoyed the ZDTV. I hope everybody watching has enjoyed the ZDTV. Thanks for the comments and chat. That was awesome. And I guess until next time, we'll see you around. Thanks, guys.